Thank you, sir. Uh, can the slides come up, please? Uh, so, whatever you do, at some point in time, we would be faced with some kind of an uncertainty. And reputation is something that has stood time. So, this is a quote as early as from Socrates, who said that to gain a good reputation is to endeavor to be what you desire to appear. And each one of us, as a large hospital or an institution, or even as an ophthalmologist, are very particular about how the world perceives us, and reputation becomes very critical. Time and again, we see these reports where our colleagues are kind of flung into the mud, so to speak, where words like botched up typically get used or negligence gets showed up. And there is very little analysis that is done, but it is more like the instant kind of an attention. And very often the damage is done very, very early. Most of these, subsequently, they would find a source of infection that probably is not attributable to the hospital or the doctor, but these media channels very rarely go back and kind of recorrect what they have shared. Now, for any institution or for anybody, there are two things of critical importance: the trust and reputation that we enjoy. Uh, Again, Philip Kotler, who's one of the management gurus, has shared that reputation is very hard and time consuming to build. And therefore, it is very critical that this is something that we walk the talk. So it's not something that you look at only at a time of a crisis, but the behavior of the institution should be towards this, so that there is some amount of reputation that is inherently built. How does this impact if it gets hurt? The recruitment of people becomes very, very difficult. Retaining people is very difficult. Attracting patients is very difficult. We've seen institutions go through a turmoil. Some have been asked to even shut down. Uh, this also becomes very critical because if you have an inherent good reputation, the negative effect to some extent could be mitigated. And again, a lot of us are not for profit. We are dependent on some amount of contributions and donations coming in. It does not only affect the fund flow coming from the patients, but also donations come down. And this has been reported pretty much from across the world. Uh, Crisis is very, very immediate, and this can have a very long-term kind of an impact. And most often we need to be clear that this can come through varied means. It can come from media, word of mouth, other publications that patients can have access to. When you look at the entire ecosystem, there are multiple players involved. So you have the government, the media, the society at large, public interest groups. Apart from that, we interact almost on a day-to-day basis with our own employees, our patients, our customers, our suppliers, and people who probably fund or contribute towards it, who form the board. And it is very important for us to see where information is flowing, because the reputation could be impacted by any one of these stakeholders in the ecosystem. Now, just to take an example of Maggie, this is something all of us love. I can stick my neck out and say that all of us have had it at least once, if not more. 2015 May, they had about 98% of consumer trust. They were selling about 15,000 tons of Maggie in India. October 2015, there was a report that came out saying that there was levels of monosodium glutamate as well as lead in it, and it dropped down to 0 tons. This happened in a time frame of about 4 to 5 months. And of course, the nation wanted to know what was happening, and all the media channels literally had a field day with it. What happened essentially was they neglected public opinion. It was a fiasco to start off with. They argued saying that testing is not appropriate, reagents are very expensive, most labs don't have it, therefore it is inaccurate, and that they were very factual, saying that we've tested 3,500 samples, but they just ignored the public sentiment, which looked at public safety. Second is they were really slow. They waited for almost about 19,000 odd mentions on social media before the first tweet. There was just one tweet from Nestle in May, which kind of very vaguely spoke about saying, yes, we understand and we are there for you, and nothing has been recalled. They pretty much denied the entire problem even happening. So this was perceived as being arrogant because they confronted not just the customers but also the regulators. They did not have a crisis management at that point in place. They overlooked the entire cultural factors because Nestle was still perceived to be a multinational company, therefore a foreign entity. So it became a us versus them kind of an interaction. And they were traditionally, being a European company, they were very, very media shy. So they did not engage with media as a habit. This resulted in the then CEO being asked to step down, and Mr. Suresh Narayan, who was heading Nestle in Philippines, was called back. And what he did was a threefold activity. One, he started communicating. He put it out there, spoke to people, set up a 24/7 consumer engagement where people could talk about it. They encouraged consumers who were using it to come back. They came up with a campaign called We Love You Too. Uh, they looked at what they knew and what they were doing. And they actually took back almost 35,000 tons of supply from their stockists across the country. And it probably is the largest logistical activity that was done. Very quickly, they turned around. And these are some of the learnings even for us. Often there is a lack of information uh, that commonly happens. You lose control of the narratives. Rumors are flying around. Things escalate. Videos are shared, not necessarily from the current context, but could be from the past. There is intense public scrutiny and you will face hostile questions. The minute that happens, the tendency is to go defensive or to blame somebody else. What we need to look at is to be proactive and form a strategy that looks at our current identity, how are we building it. You need to have some kind of a self-presentation. You can't just put it out there saying, oh, you know what, we are empathetic, and not be that in your day-to-day job, because then that's going to make a big difference, and you need to keep measuring this. This is quite easily done looking at today's social media penetration, that you can find out how the rest of the world is reputing you. Uh, Again, it is very critical that whenever there is a media report adverse, that there is a response. You cannot shy away from that response. And with the development of internet and social media, the time to response has today come down very, very much. What should be a good plan? You need to designate specific members. You need to have checklists of various scenarios. You need to practice it out, and you need to keep updating it. So during COVID, we came up with a kind of a crisis plan saying that who will talk, what happens if there's an outbreak, what if somebody asks you to shut down. So this becomes very critical because this is a very dynamic situation. It is always a good idea to have a public relations firm engaged because they generally have those inroads into media who would be willing to carry your side of the story, and they can also train the doctors in terms of what should be spoken, because we don't know how to talk, because we are very, very there is an asymmetry in the way we engage with patients, and we tend to engage with everybody in that same kind of a demeanor. Never speculate, try to be as transparent as possible, don't be defensive, and never ever say no comment, because that pretty much implies that you're taking on the blame for what is being happening. How do you know what information you're putting out, whether it is correct or not? One, would that be something that a responsible person would do? Would silence be seen as a sign of guilt? And are others already framing the story? So these three will kind of give you that cue of saying that should you respond or can you take a little bit of time? You don't have to be trigger happy. Uh, Again, critical for your team inward to be on the same page, because when people hear varying stories, they feel it is disorganized and untrustworthy. So you cannot have a plan in place where your staff just goes and shoots off the hip instead of what you've agreed on, because you would never know today who's recording what you're going to talk. So that is very, very important. Being sensitive is very critical. Uh, it is a very emotional period from the patient, their family, from the regulators that are there. Transparency is very good. But again, it is important to put out the holistic picture. It is good to get some fraternity colleagues to get into the picture and talk on your behalf. Let them know what has happened so that they have your back and they can actually put out a narrative that is the whole truth and not just the bad part that is happening. And very important again to be acting in real time to provide accurate information, and you need to see how you can avoid any damage control. To summarize, it is important for us to take responsibility. Outbreaks have happened. We probably have some aspect of it. Covering it up will only worsen the damage when it comes out. There is a need to put action, acknowledge it, accept, apologize. That becomes very, very important. And no, don't add fuel to the fire by ignoring it or being very aggressive with them. You have to be ready for a social media backlash. Uh, how are you kind of controlling it? How are you responding to it becomes very important. Are there spikes of negativity? You need to have a plan in place. You need to understand the situation. Like I mentioned, no comment will not work. Even if you're assessing the situation and you don't have the complete picture, you need to say that, saying that we're testing our samples, we are finding out what's happening, we invited other institutions to come inspect our facility. Whatever is there becomes very, very important. Don't be knee-jerk, that is very, very critical. Again, important for us to put in the shoes of our own patients and say that How would I feel if it happened to me? And how do we ensure that we do the right thing? So with that, hopefully we will have a little bit more of method to the madness when we are in this time of very adverse kind of a situation. Hopefully none of us will have to be, but this is akin to getting a heart attack and we need to be careful there. Thank you.